Hi, and welcome to this introductory video for the No BPM Mute Performer and Mute Expander. So, what is the Mute Performer? The Mute Performer is a 16 HP Vactral-based mute with 8 analog and 8 MIDI channels, and you can expand it up to a total of 72 channels using the Mute Expanders. The Mute Performer brings all of your system's mutes together into one performative interface. Think of it as a super jammable on-off controller for just about anything. The analog inputs can handle all types of signals, audio, gates, CV and triggers, while the MIDI CCs can be assigned and sent to virtually anything MIDI capable. Let's start by taking a look at the analog inputs and outputs in action. Okay, so I've patched in various signals into the Mute Performer's analog jacks. The first 4 are triggers, going to percussion voices. First one's a kick drum, hi-hat, third is an open hi-hat, and fourth is a ride. On pad 5 we have an audio signal. Pad 6 is a trigger going to a Eurorack voice. Pad 7 is an LFO going to that Eurorack voices filter. And pad 8 is an alternate pitch sequence going to that Eurorack voice. Okay, let's turn our attention to the first 3 pads, which are the function pads. The green pad below is the cue pad. When this pad is held, it allows you to select a scene or multiple mute pads and then engage them all at the same time when it's released. The pad above cue is the lock pad. The lock allows you to hold the cue without having to physically hold down the cue pad. This frees up your hands so you can do other things during a performance, and come back to release the lock whenever you're ready. To engage the lock, hold down the cue pad and tap the lock pad. Both pads will illuminate blue, indicating the lock is enabled. From there, you can tap some mute pads or a scene, and whenever you want to unlock it, just tap either the cue or the lock pad and the selections will engage. There's also a handy feature within Lock called Momentary Unlock. While your cue is locked, you can momentarily unlock mute pads by holding the Shift button and tapping a pad. The pad above lock is the load pad, but we'll get back to that in just a second. Next to the function pads are the scene pads. The scene pads allow you to prepare scenes of mute selections. Think of these as snapshots of musical phrases that you can arrange and easily move through during a performance. Now that you understand what the scenes do, let's talk about the load pad I mentioned a second ago. The 4 scenes can be saved into one of 8 banks. To load a bank, all you have to do is hold the load pad and the 8 banks will appear in yellow. While holding the load, tap one of the 8 pads and the bank will load when the load pad is released. Okay, so there are two modes on the Mute Performer. Up until now, we've been in the main mode. We're now going to take a look at the other mode, which is called Config mode. To enter Config mode, you just tap the Shift button. When you're in Shift mode, the three function pads are defined by the red icons to the left. Let's start from the bottom pad, which is the clear pad. Holding the clear pad and tapping a scene will clear out the mutes assigned to a scene in your current bank. The next pad up is the save pad. The save pad allows you to save the banks we've been talking about. To save a bank, hold the save pad, then tap one or more of the banks to save to. One more up from that is the exit pad. Tapping the exit pad will take you back to the main mode without saving the changes made in shift mode. If you want to exit shift mode and save your changes, you have to press the shift button. The next two pads are the MIDI Resync and the MIDI Invert, but I'll come back to those shortly. Lastly, in config mode, we have the mute states. The mute pads can be configured to perform different functions: stereo pairing, toggle, and default mode. Let's start with stereo pair mode. To engage a stereo pair, tap a pad, and it will now be paired with the pad below it. This will allow you to mute a stereo signal by tapping one pad rather than having to tap both pads. Tap a pad again and the pair will go green, indicating that they are now in toggle mode. Toggle mode makes two pads swap their on-off state, essentially acting like a switch. Okay, that's it for config mode. Let's move on to the jacks at the top left corner of the Mute Performer. The first one is the clock input. The clock input allows you to feed the Mute Performer a pulse of your choice. When a pulse is fed, the mute and scene pads won't engage until the next pulse. This is really great for live performance. It means you can tap a pad, then go off and do something else, and the change will happen according to the pulse you've set. A slow division of your clock is generally best for this. Okay, here I have a fairly slow division of the clock pulse. I'll plug that into the clock. You'll notice when I tap a scene or a mute pad, the RGBs will change, but it won't happen until the next pulse. The next jack we're going to look at is the scene CV. This allows scenes to be selected by control voltage. Each scene is 1.25 volts apart, and the input can safely handle voltages outside of this range. Things can get a little wild here, but hey, that's how we like it sometimes. Okay, so here I have a clock synced stepped random LFO, and I'll plug that into the scene CV. Change the speed. Speed it up. Next up is the reset input. A reset trig will reset the scene back to the last scene selected before scene trigger was received. Beneath the reset jack is the scene trig. A trigger signal applied to the scene trig input will advance the scene selection to the next scene. The scene trigs will travel in a consecutive order from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, then wrap back around to 1.
2, 8, 5,
The last two jacks are the MIDI in and out. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the Mute Performer's pads are also MIDI controllers. Mute pads can be assigned MIDI CC destinations, and by using the MIDI out, these destinations can be fed to external MIDI hardware. The MIDI in allows the Mute Performer to receive MIDI data, enabling Mute pads' CC destinations to be configured by the web editor. So let's hook up the Mute Performer to the web editor. Provided in the box are two MIDI Type A connector cables. Plug one into the MIDI in and one into the MIDI out, then using MIDI cables, connect them to your interface. Okay, so we're all plugged in and I'm on the No BPM web page. From here I'm going to click the web editor link. So now we're in the web editor. From here there's lots of stuff you can do. You can assign pads to send a program change. You can adjust the color palette. You can set up your banks and scenes and perform firmware updates. But I'll do a separate video detailing the web editor. For now, we're just going to assign some pad destinations. So here we have the 8 pads for the Mute Performer. I'll select pad 1. To the right here, we've got the Add MIDI Config tab. From here, you can either go with one of the presets, which we've added in, and we'll continue to add as more compatible devices come out, or you can assign a custom destination, but we're going to do a preset. So I'm using the Digitac 2, so I've selected the manufacturer. Now I'll go to the model, Digitac 2, select the track, I want track 1, and I'll click the Inherit MIDI Channel from Device tab. Hit OK, and that's it, that's assigned. I can change the pad name if you like, call that kick, and then just add more destinations. Go to track 2. They don't have to be in order. You can also add any device you like in whatever order you like. So all you need is a MIDI splitter to go out to 2 different devices or however many you want. So I can click pad 3 and add, say, the side drums, track 1 to that one. Okay, and so forth. And when you're happy with your selections, just go over to the Sync to Device button, click that, select your output, I'm going with the UM1, and then hit Start Sync. Now it's important not to disconnect or power down your devices while you're performing a sync. And that is done. Now that we have assigned some MIDI destinations, this is the perfect opportunity to go back to the MIDI Resync function in config mode I mentioned earlier. To explain MIDI Resync, the state of the MIDI parameters you have assigned on the Mute Performer may not match up with the state on the MIDI devices. Like here for example, on the Digitac, we assign MIDI CCs to track 1 to 8. And you'll notice that all of the Mute Performer's mute pads are muted and don't match up with the Digitac's mute states. To sync everything up, it's super simple. Tap the Shift button to enter config mode, then tap the MIDI Resync pad. Now all the MIDI states are synced. Let's have a little jam with it. Lastly for MIDI is the MIDI Invert function I mentioned earlier. The analog and MIDI sources can be muted on one pad simultaneously, so we added a feature that will swap the on-off state between the two. This function will essentially turn a pad into a switch between its analog input and its MIDI CC. To access the MIDI Invert, tap the Shift button, then tap pad 5, which is below the MIDI Resync. The mute pads with MIDI assignments will illuminate dim orange. Then tap the pads you would like to apply a MIDI Invert to. Tap the Shift button again to save the setting and go back to main mode. This can be really handy for instantly swapping out kicks, bass lines, sequences, anything really. Here's a little demonstration of that in action. I've got a kick drums trigger going into the analog input of pad 1 and the MIDI CC on channel 1 of the Digitac's mute with the kick drum sample. Last but not least for features on the Mute Performer is its ability to act as a mixer. Looking at the inputs and outputs as 2 vertical columns, the 4 inputs going down are normal to the 4th output. As long as that normalization is not broken by the 3 previous outputs, each column of 4 channels can be summed to the 4th output, meaning each module in your Mute Performer system has 2 mixers. This can be really fun if you want to send various mutable signals to a single parameter of a device. I've set up a patch of 4 LFOs going into a column of inputs, with the sum total going out of the 4th output and into the CV input of a Eurorack voices filter. As I scan through the pads, you'll hear the different LFOs come through. That concludes the introduction to the Mute Performer. Let's now move on to the Mute Expander. The Mute Expander is an 8 HP Vactral-based mute with 8 analog and 8 MIDI channels. It works standalone as a basic mute, but the MIDI and performative capabilities will only work when it's expanded to the Mute Performer. On its own, it's a pretty simple module. Feed it a signal and it will mute and unmute that signal, but when it's connected to the Mute Performer, it can create a huge network of mutes for your system. As I mentioned earlier, the Mute Performer system can have up to 72 channels using the Mute Expanders. The mixer function I mentioned earlier for the Mute Performer also applies to the Mute Expander. Each 4 vertical rows are normal to the 4th and final output, giving you 2 mixers in one. That about wraps it up for this introduction to the Mute Performer and Mute Expander. Thanks for sticking around, and stay tuned. We're already working on another type of performative expander that's going to be an awesome addition to this system. For a detailed walkthrough on how to link up your expanders to the Mute Performer, check out our YouTube page for a video we've made on that.